Hi, Joe.
Hi, KB.
And welcome to the first episode of Sound Barriers. We created this podcast because we wanted to create an open and safe space for musicians and professionals in the music scene to share their creative identity.
Our three-part series on the podcast will discuss what it means to be Scottish in today's music industry by sharing and discussing experiences with our esteemed guests to give you an understanding and insight into the Scottish music industry.
And on today's episode, we will be discussing the effects of Scottish accents and identity within the music scene and what changes need to be made. Today's guest is Darren McGarvey.
Darren McGarvey is a social commentator and was an activist during the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. His alter ego Loki is a critically acclaimed Scottish rapper, and between 2003 and 2008, Loki became one of Scotland's most influential hip-hop artists with his release Friendly World and Summer Knows a Darker Shade of Grey. He is most passionate about contributing to the popularising of the Scottish accent in today's rap music.
In 2018, Loki staged a 60-minute show live at the Edinburgh Fringe, Spit It Out, blending elements of rap, music, spoken word and stand-up comedy. And his most recent works include government issue music protests and trigger warning. Thank you for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure, and just having a flood of nostalgia, mostly nostalgia being in Box for the first time in many years.
I've never been in here before. This is my first time in Box.
Well, it was a kind of mainstay for anyone who liked to kind of get the balance between heavy drinking and creativity back when I was sort of in my prime.
Like the perfect place for that.
That's what I was saying. When I stayed in the Gorbals here, I was 18, and this was the kind of hub. This was absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Reasonable prices, and, you know, the clientele's kind of like ball on deck, not too fancy cocktail bar type of clientele, you know.
Shout out to the Box.
Yeah. I'm just going to kick it off. Why do you think in Scottish and in music that Scottish accents are sometimes viewed as cringe, or was viewed as cringe by certain listeners?
Well, I mean, there's lots to unpack in that. The major factor is that as a result of Scotland and Scottish culture having a junior position within the wider UK culture, which is predominantly an English culture, then Scots are conditioned to see newsreaders, politicians, people of status talking properly. And that means that when they hear their own accent back, there is a sort of reflexive disgust, embarrassment, because the voice in and of itself is not a problem. It's that voice doesn't deserve any sort of platform in any serious way. Obviously, people would contest that. They would say that's not what it is, and you know, it's somebody who sounds like a BAM, that is heavy cringe or whatever it is. But there's that aspect of it, and this is a widespread problem in the UK. If you look into accent prejudice, the most trusted accent is the least spoken accent, and that's the received pronunciation of your BBC newsreader, which is the only accent spoken in the UK which has no relationship with a geographical culture. It's an institutional accent that's mimicked and learned within private schools. But for some reason, people trust that. And that's why a lot of people can vote for someone like Boris Johnson, who's a proven liar, because he does retain a kind of poshness, which we instinctively, particularly as working class people, are kind of, a lot of us sort of, we just automatically think, well, this person must know what they're talking about because they sound right and they wear a suit and they're surrounded constantly with the kind of iconography of legitimacy and status. And then you take somebody like me with a hoodie and a bottle of Buckfast, rapping in front of some graffiti, and all of those things, they don't come with the same sort of cultural cachet. Do you know what I mean? All those things are red flags for most people.
Do you think that the perception's changed over time, or has had a more prominent conversation nowadays, or?
It has changed. Comedians have a slightly easier time of it. Your Frankie Boyles, Kevin Bridges, obviously Billy Connolly, before them Janie Godley, more recently as well. It seems to be that once an audience is endeared to you and invested in you, they forget about the cringe aspect of the accent once they get that identification. The problem with hip hop is there's an additional cultural barrier there, because most people are not used to listening to hip hop done in its proper form. So you've got the fold there culturally where people are used to commercial hip hop. So when they hear underground authentic hip hop, that's already a barrier. And then there's the compounding aspect of it being done by a Scottish person. The big reaction you'll get from people is that, we're pretending to be black. That's what they'll say. Why are you pretending to be black? Because they can't understand that while obviously hip hop originated in African American communities in the United States, it's a global culture. And the entry level for participation is simply a desire to practice the craft and do it well and be authentic to yourself. And if you can do those things, you'll be accepted within hip hop, whatever your background.
Excellent. I was going to ask, how is it yourself? How is it you get started in hip hop?
Well, I began quite early, maybe 16, 17. My dad introduced me to sort of Grandmaster Flash, and that was the era when MTV were still playing music. And really, you turned on your TV and it was just music videos all day. And now and again, there would be a documentary about music. And then you had MTV Base, which was more focused on kind of music of black origin, which is the stuff that I was into straight away. And there you would get less commercial music. So you would get kind of like, Gangstar or maybe sort of earlier Wu-Tang stuff. And then I was kind of coming of age around the time where Eminem's first album came out, Slim Shady LP. And that was a big cultural phenomenon. And I think that was the first time really I got that really strong identification with an artist, because he was talking about coming up in a violent community, his mother being an addict and neglecting stuff that he had experienced, but also he had this kind of sense of humour about it all, which was kind of cartoonish. And I gravitated towards that. And I think that was the moment where I thought, this is something I can actually take part in, rather than just being a kind of passive listener. And any hip hop artist, whatever element they're involved in, graffiti, DJing, b-boy, b-girl, there's always a moment, there's an artist that they really connect with and they think, no, I'm not just watching this, I'm going to do this.
Yep, can you act on it?
I know that you do a lot of documentaries about Scottish identity and all that. And do you think that it should be something that should be embraced more in the music industry side of Scottish people showing their identity within their accents or what they're making? And do you think that there's a clear division now that it's harder for Scottish people maybe to break through?
Well, Scottish artists are doing okay, but the artists that do best are the ones that get kind of industry backing. And that means Creative Scotland backing. That means Music Industry Association backing, PRS backing. And in order to kind of obtain that backing, then you get a sign pretty early on that there's a certain type of sensibility that your music should have. Not a kneecap sensibility, you know what I mean? So really, it's a kind of feature of our culture, particularly in Scotland, where we really thrive on this idea of that we're differentiated from the UK culture, that there's something distinct about Scotland, but at the same time, there are pretty profound disincentives in play, institutionally and culturally, to being completely authentic. My album that I'm just completing now, that I'll be bringing forward at the end of December, launching at the end of December, is called Not Funded by Creative Scotland, and it's a commentary on all of that. It's a commentary on you have an arts funder that is essentially priding itself in the language of diversity and inclusion and sustainability, while being dominated by a kind of white middle-class sensibility, torturous application forms that even academics would be reduced to tears filling out. and then even then you don't know if you're going to get the funding or what sort of stipulations are going to come with it. And so really the record is the culmination of everything that I've experienced in the arts, because the truth is the thing I'm best at is hip hop, and it's the thing I've had the least success with if you're gauging it by the normal metrics of the other success I've had. I'm an award-winning author, I'm an award-winning broadcaster, I've sold out the Fringe. Someone told me the other day, I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, right? Now, my friend and mentor Sace, in his academic journey, he observed a thing that I think is really key to understanding what we're talking about here. I spent 20 years developing a craft, building an audience and a demand for my music. There are bands in Scotland that have record deals that couldn't fill a club like I could, right? But only when I started writing in the Queen's English did I get any real recognition from any industry for what I could do. My first piece of work that I presented to the public was Poverty Safari, and it was a #1 best-selling book, and it won the Orwell Prize, and I'm still getting royalty checks for it, all this time later. So you tell me why that is. It's because I wrote in a form where the fact I was Scottish was not apparent in the language, but I'm just as proficient with words when I'm rapping, and I would say probably there's more skill and there's more confidence, but because it's Scottish, it just turns a lot of people off. But I just lean into that. I take that as kind of fuel. I like getting in people's faces about that, particularly with the kind of Loki persona, which allows me to be a bit less cautious and a bit less guarded and a bit less authory. And a bit more, is that fucking right? Aye, cool. Yeah. Well, let's do it.
I was going to ask if it was frustrating for you, feeling that way, but do you just use it as fuel, like you said, to push even harder? And
well, yeah, because I'm in a position few Scottish artists or hip hop artists or Scottish musicians will ever find themselves in, which is I still make music for a scene, but I have an international profile. So I sell books in China and Japan and Korea, 13, 14 languages, right? I'll be invited to international conferences to talk about poverty, inequality, blah, 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 blah. But I'm so passionate about music that I can't put it down. So when I'm making an album, it's still written with that scene in mind. And the thing I'm trying to do with this album is leverage that profile that I have to really make some key arguments to the arts establishment that I think they need to hear and that they won't listen to or won't have to listen to from any other artist. Whereas with me, when I announce an album called Not Funded by Creative Scotland, you best believe everybody at every level of that organisation knows it's coming out and is bracing for some sort of impact, whatever it might be. Because I've been campaigning for years about hip-hop artists not getting the funding that they need for parity between them and all of the other genres that do get well supported. They're flying all over the world to go on tour. You see a lot of artists and they're creating an image that they're successful and even wealthy. But it's all off the back of public funding. You take the public funding away, could they survive? There's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in that. But that's what I mean about the sensibility. It's like you've got to kind of become inauthentic in a way. And in that way, you sort of fit into the framework culturally where you create a certain impression and a certain look where the public's watching it and they don't know all the little tricks that are going on behind the scenes. So my album's about kind of pulling the curtain away and saying, here are the tricks. And also, I'm trying to give the Scottish hip-hop scene some of the no vocabulary, but vocabulary, the arguments, the angles that they need in order to navigate the cultural setup, because a lot of them won't even attempt it. They won't leave the hip-hop scene. There's a security there, but that's partly because they instinctively know that they'll be rejected or excluded, and I'm saying, no, look, with these arguments, you can make your inroads and make your point clear.
Yep. I keep coming back to this kind of theme of education and about breaking down the barriers that we feel with the guests. I think it is brilliant that you're standing as like an advocate for these artists out there that again maybe don't feel as if it is possible, or they'll have to tailor their act and their identity towards what the system's looking for. So for you to come on and discuss this again, just thanks.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, to be honest, I enjoy discussing this sort of stuff. I have to do a lot of stuff to pay the bills that I don't enjoy as much as this. So it's not a difficult thing for me to do.
Excellent. I was going to take us on, man, with another wee question. It was to see what role do you think that Scottish identity plays in the music scene and have here in Scotland? Does embracing the identity enhance the music, or does it kind of pigeonhole the artist by embracing the Scottish identity?
What is the Scottish identity?
That's a bit wide.
There are many facets to it. So if it's an object, right, and you're observing it from different angles, right, one aspect of Scottish identity is just that it's not English. That's not very interesting to me. It's very interesting to a lot of other people, right? We're not English. Wow, what an achievement. By lottery of birth. It's like people who brag because they're tall. Do you know what I mean? I did nothing to achieve this, but I'm very proud of this. The truth is, Scotland is a country that is in a very bad condition. And if you are trading on a Scottish identity, but your music or creativity is not commenting or making any reference to what is going on, then you're touching the surface of what Scottish is. And my music and a lot of the music that we hear in the hip hop community is very concerned with offering observations and commentary and analysis of the underbelly of Scottish culture. Which is exclusion, which is criminal justice, which is residential instability, which is broken homes, which is educational exclusion, high levels of police involvement, mental health crises, addiction and death in a lot of cases. So, you know, I have a problem when Scottishness is kind of branded and those essential ingredients that are true to what living in Scotland actually is are kind of are not touched upon. But I also believe artists should be free to explore whatever they want. And if they don't want to touch on that stuff, either because they've not experienced it or because musically that's just not their vibe, that's cool. I don't judge that. But when you're trading on this idea of Scottishness and really putting yourself out there, and particularly if you're appealing to the nationalist culture, which is very strong, and those are the people that will come to your gigs, and those are the people that will part with money because they're very, very passionate about Scotland and Scottishness and being Scottish and not being English. When you're really, really leaning into that, but your music's kind of devoid of any sort of substance about what living in Scotland's actually like beyond the flag and beyond the scenery and beyond the history, then, you know, to me that's kind of vacuous and cowardly.
The perception of Scottish accents and the use of accents in music, do you think that there is a distinction between genres when using accents? Is it more acceptable as a word, I guess, in like indie or folk music kind of genres? Or do you see, or with pop and hip hop, like do you see the
accent leaning towards one more genre than another?
I mean, I think if someone writes a belter tune, and Jerry Cinnamon might be a good example for this, right? His stuff is obviously Scottish. His audience has obviously grown over the years. And really, he wrote a song that cut through anybody's prejudice about the accent because it was so catchy and so natural sounding that everyone just forgot. Yeah. Now, you also have a contingent of Jerry Cinnamon antagonists who think the song is rubbish and think he's rubbish. And that's partly because of the accent prejudice and also probably a bit of envy. You know, when a working class person does well, they get it from every front. Yeah. You know, they get it from every front. They get it from the poshos. They get it from their peers. They get it from every angle. But I think the key antidote to overcoming that barrier is just to write music that is undeniably good. And whatever your genre, whatever your style, a lot of people, they're still finding their style. They're still finding what do they want to sound like. They're still wearing their influences on their sleeve, and that might be a bit too obvious for an audience to see. No, that just sounds derivative of that thing. But the kind of approach that I've taken is and that's partly because of the privilege conferred upon me by the success I've had in other areas, is that I can really lean in to the things about hip hop and Loki that other people find uncomfortable, because I'm not. I can fully inhabit that because I'm not worried if it goes well or not. I'm not riding on it. It's just for me. It's just there's a creative benchmark I'm trying to hit. I don't care about what the reviewers say. I don't give a shit if the skinny wants to interview me or review it. In fact, I would rather they didn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I just couldn't sit through the mind-numbing questions about it. So it's like I can just completely give everything to it, like an underground hip-hop artist can, but also enjoy a certain level of a profile where people will come and check the music because Darren McGarvey did it. And whether they like it or no, that's for them to decide. But that's an unusual position for someone to be in. It would be more the case that someone would achieve what I've achieved and then they would be like, right, I'm done with music because this other stuff is more lucrative. But actually I've found that the other success has allowed me to invest more heavily in my creativity. So taking Scottish rap to the fringe, repackaging it. And what's really interesting is all the accent prejudice goes away. See, when you take the beats out and deliver it as poetry in a theatre, the context of a theatre primes the audience to expect something sophisticated, and not just sophisticated for them to watch. It says something about them being there, that they're sophisticated. So they're in a different mindset. You put hip hop on and they're like, I'm superior to this is a load of shite. You sit them in a theatre and turn out the lights and they're sitting thinking, if I don't get this, I'm stupid. And I've always played with those dynamics because I move in and out of a lot of different cultural spheres. You know, I've got raps that are over the most hardcore boom bap hip hop beats, and then I can go and do a poetry slam. Do you know what I mean?
It's like contextual almost in that point.
Exactly. It's got to pay a lot of attention to the writing. I know that I'll be wanting to port the rap to another context. So can it stand up in a comedy venue? Can it stand up in a poetry slam? Can it stand up with ambient music and black and white video? Not everybody does that, do you know what I mean? But I've found that that's how you can diversify in order to make it more financially viable.
That's really interesting.
I do find that brilliant. Again, no lot of artists know they just candidate. They wouldn't think to do that kind of stuff, man. That is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Stupid rapper.
No.
Stupid rappers, that.
Do you think, can I get into, as you say, about generations and kind of audiences differentiating between, do you feel that it's a generational divide when it comes to the Scottish accent and how it's been perceived in music? Is it different for newer audiences?
I would say the big contribution that my generation of the hip-hop community made was to make it less cool to rap in any other accent but your own. When I came in, it was still the done thing to start with an Americanised accent. And the generations before me, they started with English accents. And then there came a point where I really thought that, you know, your Two-Tone Committee and your Power Cut Productions, which is kind of pioneering generation before me, I thought they were cooler than the American and English stuff. I identified more with it, and I really saw them as, this is what I'm aiming for. My goal was not to be a commercial rapper. My goal was to walk into a venue and be treated with the same level of respect as these older guys who had a certain gravitas about them. They weren't household names, but they were respected for their art form. And so really I carried that pride into my work. And then the generation that came up under me, I became an artist that was their first contact with the Scottish accent. And so then they go back to their schemes, you know, Easterhouse, Penny, you know, Poso, whatever it is. And then there's other people rapping in American accents. And they're like, what you doing, man? That sounds stupid. Do you know what I mean? They wouldn't be as diplomatic as that. Do you know what I mean? But they'd be like, what are you doing that for? No, that's... And so there's a debate within hip-hop itself, which can sometimes be quite contentious because we succeeded to the point where turning up and rapping in an accent that wasn't your own was almost, you could legitimately get bullied for that. I'm not saying it was successful that people got bullied. I'm saying that shows a real distinct cultural shift within a very obscure cultural sphere where it's vibrating on a different frequency. Do you know what I mean? And we made a big contribution to that.
Talking about contributions and stuff, kind of to wrap it up, as an activist, an author, a musician, just all around
Legends.
saying what needs to be
That's
said.
very kind.
Do you think that you have, or us in general, have a responsibility to represent our culture and focus on a universal appeal as well, and kind of reach a larger audience?
It's for the individual artist to make that decision. And I think culture is best served when artists are very focused on what it is that they're doing and they do it to the best of their ability. It's then culture's responsibility at the level of audiences and institutions whose responsibility is to facilitate creativity, to make sure there is space for all the different iterations and all the different interpretations of that. We're getting better at including hip hop in that, partly due to a lot of the campaigning people like me have done over the years. That's why there's a hip hop bursary. But there is still, I would say, at the level of the music industry, a resistance. You know, because if I was a kind of mediocre solo guitarist, with the audience I've got, I'd have a record deal in Scotland. I'd be signed to a Scottish label. There's just no question. Do you know what I mean? But I'm a rapper, and people can't touch me.
It's
Do you know
the stigmatism that surrounds it. It's no.
Aye, and also, like, you know, because I've had to be so self-sufficient over the years and have developed a reputation, I guess, within the industry for being resistant. I don't hang about with musicians. I don't go to I get invites to all the things every year. I don't go. I'm not interested. It's just a pure drink fest and a fucking arse kissing fest, and I'm not into it. I'd rather hang about with people be like, Darren, shut up, get the chairs out. Do you know what I mean? We're about to have a CA meeting. You know, you're on the teas and coffees. Do you know what I mean? People pretending to have listened to music that they've never heard of and just blah, 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 blah. So that's probably part of the reason as well. And I do see other hip hop artists who are maybe a bit more open to the arms of the industry, getting a bit of support, and that's great. Do you know what I mean? But I just don't think it's in Loki's nature to be kind of, whining and dining on that side of things. And it gives me a clearer perspective when I'm offering that cultural commentary, because whether that stuff actually gets recognised and I want to make an album that's difficult for, say, awards judges. I want them to all be sitting with it and to be like, shit, this is definitely one of the top 10 albums of the year, but it's called Not Funded by Creative Scotland. And it's in that's when the album becomes art. It's when all the artists who are going to listen to it, who are funded by Creative Scotland, can't show public support. What does that say about the cultural sensibility? What does that say about Scotland when my own wife has to publicly distance herself from the album because she's got a funding bid that's ongoing? So really, I mean, it's a bit mischievous the way I've calibrated it and the gradient at which it'll enter the conversation. Do you know what I mean? But I've got the benefit of being able to do that as an artist. And I'm not saying anybody else has to attempt that, but everybody has to find their voice. Everybody else has to find their mission. And that's when you make the best music. And that is as satisfying as anything for me.
I think it's really interesting to hear a new side and like a new perspective, because you don't often hear voices like yourself speaking what needs to be said.
It's interesting that I know what you mean when you say that. In my scene, it's not new. You know? But I get what you mean.
We don't hear much of it.
That's industry. And the thing is as well, in Scotland, one of the things that people trade on is talking in the language of an industry. But anyone who knows there is no industry. There is a bunch of different labels and organisations and associations and groups, and they all participate in a conversation that creates the illusion of an industry. The industry's in London, right? See, when anything of any value to me financially is happening in my life, the phone call's coming from London, right?
Yeah.
Like Trust me. Do you know what I mean? Like, so people up here, particularly musicians who are maybe getting a bit high on their own supply, you know, with the selfies on Instagram, making it look like they're really it and they're doing shit. I would say spend less energy, try to cultivate a false image and stay in the fucking studio and stay working on your craft. Because at the end of the day, like, that's what matters. And there's people out there who can see through all that. And I'm one of them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can see it. So, like, just let's not live in a fantasy. You know what I mean? Scotland has a long way to go to have an industry worth talking about. We have great contributors to music, great contributors to the arts. We have world-beating artists. We have world-beating artists across all disciplines. We punch above our weight, there is no doubt. But the ones who've done the best, they're not schmoozing about, they're not participating in that, they're lone wolves, they're trailblazers, they're people who got told you'll never make it, and then they did. And when you're trying to kind of be pally-wally with the industry types, you know, it's a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game, man. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, it's just, people are full of shit. Do you know what I mean?
I don't think that anybody else could word it better than that.
Nail on the head, to be honest. Cut the red tape.
Thank you for having brilliant opinions and making it a conversation worth having.
Sharing your truth, sharing your voice. That's exactly what the podcast is about, and we really appreciate you coming on.
All good.
Really appreciate it.
Absolutely amazing.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, check us out on social media at
Sound Barriers on Facebook and TikTok,
Sound Barriers Podcast on Instagram, and S Barrier Pod on Twitter/X.